I'm Sarah, 30 years old, and 3 months ago I got an email invitation to my half-sister Chloe's extravagant wedding. But there was one problem. I wasn't invited in person, just a high-definition, professional live stream for me. I thought that was the worst part. Until the camera panned to the guests, and there he was, my fiancé, David, sitting comfortably with my father's family, the same fiancé who told me he was across the country at a tech conference. That frozen live stream frame? It shattered my world. But what I uncovered after that made the betrayal at that wedding look like child's play. Before I share how I took back my power and uncovered the truth they never wanted me to find, let me know where you're tuning in from, and if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit like and subscribe, because you deserve to know you're not alone. To really understand why I was relegated to a virtual seat at my own sister's wedding, you need to know a bit about my family. My parents, Michael and Eleanor, divorced when I was 14. I can still picture that night. Dad, Michael, was zipping up his luggage, his back to me. Mom, Eleanor, was quietly sobbing in their bedroom. I stood in the hallway, clutching a worn-out teddy bear I was far too old for, watching as 18 years of marriage dissolved before my eyes. "It's not about you, Sarah," he'd said, without even turning. "Your mother and I just grew apart." That was the first lie in what would become an almost artistic tapestry of deception. Within 3 months, my father married Victoria, a woman 15 years his junior who worked at his real estate development company. I later pieced together that their affair had been brewing for 2 years before the divorce. When I turned 16, Chloe, my half-sister, was born. From that moment, I felt myself gradually fading from my father's life. The candid snapshots of me that once adorned his office walls were slowly replaced by professional, perfectly posed family portraits, featuring him, Victoria, and baby Chloe. My visits to their expansive new home became increasingly formal. I stayed in the guest room, a pristine space that felt less and less like it belonged to me. Meanwhile, my bedroom at my mother's house remained a time capsule of my teenage years, well into my 20s. A testament to our financial struggles after the divorce settlement left Eleanor financially vulnerable. My father's real estate business, however, absolutely flourished after the divorce. He built luxury housing developments across multiple states, his empire expanding while my mother worked 2 jobs just to keep our modest 3-bedroom house. The contrast between my 2 lives was stark, almost comical in its severity. At Dad's place, everything was custom-built, premium, and immaculately maintained. The air hummed with an expensive, quiet luxury. At Mom's, we'd spend Sunday mornings meticulously clipping coupons, and our old sedan would make worrying gurgling noises every time it rained, a sound that became a familiar, albeit unsettling soundtrack to our lives. The pattern of exclusion started subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. When I was 17, they took Chloe to Disney World. The reason given to me? "Oh, you have finals that week, Sarah." When I was 20, they celebrated Christmas in Switzerland. A whimsical family trip. But for me, the explanation was, "We just couldn't get another ticket at such short notice, darling." By the time I was 25, I was routinely discovering major family events, birthdays, anniversaries, holiday gatherings, only after seeing carefully curated photo dumps on social media. My father's standard dismissive response whenever I tried to articulate my hurt feelings became a familiar refrain. "You're being too sensitive." Or with a slight shake of his head, "We're not excluding you on purpose. It's just logistics." The word logistics became a thinly veiled excuse for a widening chasm. Then, when I was 27, my mother passed away from breast cancer. The funeral was the last time our entire extended family was gathered in one place. My father delivered a eulogy that was stiff, almost formal, focusing more on their early dating years than their marriage, or, heartbreakingly, her role as a mother. Victoria stood beside him, her hand resting possessively on his arm, a silent but unmistakable assertion of her place. Chloe, then just 11, looked visibly bored throughout the service, quietly playing games on a tablet, a small glowing screen reflecting the flickering candlelight. After Mom died, I poured myself into my career as a graphic designer. It became my anchor, my escape. I built a modest but steadily growing freelance business, working remotely for clients scattered across the country. My apartment, though small, was entirely mine, paid for with money I had earned myself, a stark contrast to Chloe's private school education and designer wardrobe, which always felt like a silent, deliberate rub. I met David Rivers 3 years ago through mutual friends at a housewarming party. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely captivated by my design work. With dark hair that always fell into a perfectly artful disarray, and an easy, infectious laugh, he quickly became the magnetic center of my world. He worked at a tech startup, developing some kind of financial software that I never quite fully grasped. But his ambition, his drive, truly impressed me. Within 6 months, we had moved in together, and last year, he proposed with a beautiful, understated ring, a sapphire nestled between 2 smaller diamonds. David knew all about my complicated family situation. He was there for me on the anniversaries of my mother's death, holding me close when I couldn't stop the tears. He listened patiently to my frustrations about yet another family vacation I'd been excluded from, another public photo proving my absence. He even gently encouraged me to keep trying with my father. "Family is important, Sarah," he would say, his voice soft but firm. "Sometimes you have to be the bigger person." In hindsight, his persistent insistence that I maintain contact with my father, despite the constant emotional toll and ongoing hurt, should have been the first crimson flag I missed. David met my father and Victoria at a tense dinner shortly after we got engaged. I remember the air in the expensive restaurant felt thick with unspoken history. To my surprise, my father and David seemed to connect surprisingly well. Michael, usually reserved, asked David incredibly detailed questions about his startup. They even exchanged phone numbers, discussing potential investment opportunities. At the time, I was genuinely pleased, thinking perhaps this was finally the bridge, the connection that could mend the gaping family gap. Over the past year, however, I began to notice increasingly strange behavior from both David and my family. David's schedule became packed with an unusual number of business dinners and investor meetings, more than seemed normal for someone in his position at a growing startup. My father would occasionally bring up David's name in our infrequent phone calls, but would quickly change the subject whenever I pressed for details. And then there was Victoria. She started sending me birthday and holiday cards, elaborate ones, something she had never once bothered with in the nearly 2 decades I'd known her. It all felt off. But I was so desperate, so incredibly happy to finally see what I perceived as positive movement in our family relationships, that I actively suppressed my instincts, silencing the tiny, nagging voice of doubt. After years of feeling like a ghost, an afterthought, I truly believed I was finally seeing glimmers of acceptance, or so I thought. The truth, as I would soon discover, was far darker, far more insidious than I could have ever imagined. And it would take a wedding livestream, freezing at precisely the wrong moment, for everything to come crashing down. The digital invitation to Chloe's wedding arrived in my email on a Tuesday morning in April. I nearly choked on my coffee when I saw it. Chloe was only 17, barely out of high school. The invitation itself was ridiculously elaborate. A digital masterpiece with animated butterflies that fluttered across the screen and a custom soundtrack that swelled with saccharine string music. It grandly announced the union of Chloe Thompson and Ethan Davis, set to take place at my father's sprawling estate on the San Juan Islands, 3 months from now, in July. I immediately called my father. His voice sounded strangely nervous when he answered. "Sarah, I was just about to call you today," he stammered, before I could even mention the invitation. "Dad, Chloe is 17, I said, genuinely concerned. My voice laced with disbelief. "Isn't this a little young to be getting married?" "She's very mature for her age," he replied defensively, his tone hardening slightly. "And Ethan comes from an excellent family. His father and I have business connections going back 15 years. The conversation quickly veered into uncomfortable territory when I broached the topic of travel arrangements. "Actually, about that," my father said, clearing his throat, a telltale sign of evasion. "We're having to limit the in-person guests quite strictly." "What does that mean?" I asked, already feeling that familiar, sickening sensation of exclusion creeping in. "The venue has capacity limitations," he explained, though the venue was his own 15-acre estate, boasting multiple buildings and expansive grounds. Fire codes and all that. He sounded so official, so reasonable. "But we've arranged for a professional live stream for extended family and friends who can't attend in person. It's top-notch, multiple camera angles, high definition. You'll be able to see everything. We'll even wave to the camera for you." His voice had taken on that patronizing tone I knew far too well. You're saying I can't come to my own sister's wedding? My voice cracked despite my desperate efforts to remain composed. Half-sister, Victoria interjected from the background, not quite quietly enough. And it's not just you, Sarah. We had to make difficult decisions about the guest list. I would later discover that distant cousins I'd never even heard of had received physical invitations, while I, the actual daughter, was relegated to a pixelated experience. That night, I told David about the wedding and my exclusion from the in-person guest list. He seemed unusually interested in the details, pressing me with questions about the exact date and location. Then, he delivered his own news. That's the same weekend as the San Francisco conference, he said, frowning as he checked his calendar. I have to present our new software platform to potential investors there. There's no way I can reschedule. So I'll be watching Chloe's wedding alone. I tried not to sound as utterly pathetic as I felt. I'm sorry, babe. He kissed my forehead, a brief, comforting gesture. But hey, maybe it's for the best. Those family events are always so stressful for you, aren't they? In the weeks leading up to the wedding, my inbox was flooded with increasingly detailed emails about the live stream. Technical instructions, testing links, even suggestions for creating an immersive at-home experience, complete with recommended champagne pairings for different parts of the ceremony. The level of production value dedicated to excluding me was almost impressive in its absurdity. Meanwhile, David became incredibly busy with preparations for his San Francisco trip. He bought a brand new suit, claiming his old one was too worn for such important investor meetings. He took it to the dry cleaners, promising to pick it up right before his flight. This deal could change everything for us, he said excitedly, his eyes bright with ambition. If I land these investors, we might finally be able to afford that dream house we looked at. I was supportive, if somewhat distracted by the approaching wedding. I even helped him prepare his presentation, offering design feedback, and running through potential questions with him late into the night. A week before the wedding, social media became a torment. I started seeing posts from relatives, Aunt Harriet posting about her flight to Seattle, Cousin Ben checking in at a charming hotel near my father's estate. Everyone seemed to be arriving early for various pre-wedding festivities. A welcome dinner, a scenic beach party, a golf outing at an exclusive club. The night before David was scheduled to leave for San Francisco, I used his laptop to order takeout while he was in the shower. A notification popped up from his email. Without really thinking about it, I clicked it open. My breath hitched. It was a hotel confirmation for the Puget Sound Resort, less than a mile from my father's estate, for the entire wedding weekend. The reservation was for 2 adults. My hand shook uncontrollably as I quickly closed the email and shut the laptop, my heart hammering against my ribs. It had to be a mistake. Maybe it was for someone at his company. Perhaps he'd booked it before realizing he had the conference. I conjured a dozen frantic explanations in my mind, none of which managed to quell the sickening, gnawing feeling that had begun to bloom in the pit of my stomach. When David emerged from the shower, toweling his hair, I almost confronted him. But some self-protective instinct, a primal need to delay the inevitable, held me back. Instead, I smiled, a brittle, strained expression, and asked if he'd packed everything for San Francisco. All set, he said, kissing me casually on the forehead. I'll call you every night, I promise. The morning David left, he seemed oddly formal. His hug was stiff, his kiss brief, almost perfunctory. He left 4 hours before his supposed flight, claiming he needed extra time for security for last-minute checks. Have fun watching the wedding, he said as he rolled his suitcase to the door. Take some screenshots for me. If only he knew how literally I would take that suggestion. The day before the wedding, I received texts from both my father and Victoria, reminding me to log in early to get the full pre-ceremony experience. Chloe sent a single terse message. Hope the stream works, lol. I spent that evening alone in my apartment, trying not to drown in self-pity. I opened a bottle of wine and, like a masochist, scrolled through social media, torturing myself with images of the rehearsal dinner I wasn't invited to. There was Aunt Harriet, her arm draped warmly around Chloe. There was Uncle Martin, making a boisterous toast. And then in the background of one photo, a fleeting glimpse, so quick I almost missed it. A familiar profile that looked unnervingly like David. My stomach clenched. But when I went back to look more closely, the photo had been deleted. Sleep eluded me that night as my mind raced with possibilities, each one more painful, more devastating than the last. By morning, I had almost convinced myself I was being paranoid. The wedding was at 2 p.m. I had 5 hours to pull myself together and prepare to watch my half-sister get married through a computer screen. The morning of Chloe's wedding, I decided defiantly to make the best of the situation. If I had to watch from 200 miles away, I would at least do it with style. I put on a navy blue cocktail dress I'd been saving for a truly special occasion, applied my makeup carefully, even ordered myself a small bouquet of white roses to mark the day. I set up my laptop on the dining table, connected it to the television for a larger, more impactful view, and uncorked the bottle of expensive champagne I'd been saving for David's triumphant return from San Francisco. The live stream began an hour before the ceremony, opening with sweeping drone shots of my father's estate. The property looked even more magnificent from the air, a verdant canvas with meticulously manicured gardens, a shimmering reflecting pool, and rows of pristine white chairs arranged in perfect symmetry on the main lawn. A string quartet played softly, their melodies drifting over the scene as guests began to arrive. The women in elegant, colorful summer dresses, the men in light suits, perfectly suited for a warm July afternoon. I poured myself champagne, the bubbles tickling my nose, and watched as the camera panned across the gathering crowd. I recognized relatives I hadn't seen in years, faces from a past life, my father's business associates, Victoria's large extended family. Everyone seemed to be having a wonderful time, greeting each other with warm hugs and air kisses, accepting flutes of champagne from circulating waiters. The camera occasionally focused on Chloe, getting ready in my father's opulent house, her makeup being applied by a professional artist, Victoria fussing with her veil, adjusting it just so. My half-sister looked absolutely beautiful in an elaborate gown that probably cost more than my annual rent. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of something akin to affection for her. She was just a teenager, after all. This entire excessive, extravagant production wasn't her fault. At exactly 2 p.m., the music shifted, signaling the start of the ceremony. The officiant took his place under an archway overflowing with white roses. The groom, Ethan, walked to the front with his best man. I didn't know much about Ethan, only that he came from a wealthy family and had known my father for years through various business connections. The wedding party proceeded down the aisle one by one, bridesmaids in delicate pale pink dresses, groomsmen looking slightly uncomfortable in their formal wear in the summer heat, a tiny flower girl who looked to be about 4, scattering rose petals with determined, serious concentration. As the camera panned across the seated guests during the procession, I started noticing faces that made my blood run cold. My cousin Maya, who had told me she couldn't afford to fly in from California. My father's oldest friend Robert, who had messaged me just last week saying he was recovering from surgery and would also be watching online. And then in the third row, on the groom's side, partially obscured by a large dramatic floral arrangement, but utterly unmistakably clear to me, David, my fiancé, the man who was supposed to be in San Francisco, presenting to investors. He was wearing the new suit he'd bought, his dark hair freshly cut, looking completely at ease, a relaxed smile on his face. He was seated between my Uncle Philip and a woman I recognized as my father's executive assistant. I choked on my champagne, a violent cough that sent it spilling down the front of my dress, a dark stain blossoming on the navy fabric. I fumbled for the remote to pause the stream, but in my shock, my hands shaking uncontrollably, I dropped it. It slid with a soft thud under the dining table. By the time I retrieved it, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline, the camera had moved on, focusing on Chloe beginning her walk down the aisle on my father's arm. I sat frozen, barely breathing, the world outside my apartment receding, replaced by the pounding in my ears. As the ceremony continued, my mind spun, desperately trying to construct an explanation. A coincidence, a misunderstanding, anything. But deep down, a cold, hard certainty began to settle. I knew. The camera returned to wider shots of the guests during the vows. I scrutinized every frame, my eyes darting across the screen, searching for David. There he was again, a broad smile on his face, applauding warmly as Chloe and Ethan exchanged rings. He looked completely at home, occasionally leaning over to whisper something to my uncle, a gesture of familiarity, of belonging. This wasn't someone who had been invited at the last minute. This was someone who was meant to be there. As my half-sister and her new husband shared their first kiss as a married couple, A moment of saccharine perfection, the camera panned across the applauding crowd, a final sweeping shot. And that's when the live stream froze. The image that burned itself into my retinas was devastating in its perfect clarity. A tableau of betrayal, David standing and applauding with everyone else, a wide, genuine smile on his face. My father, Michael, with his arm possessively around Victoria, looking utterly triumphant, a smug satisfaction etched onto his features. And most shocking of all, gleaming unmistakably around Victoria's neck, was my grandmother's sapphire pendant, a family heirloom, a cherished piece of history that my mother, Eleanor, had always told me would be mine someday, passed down through the maternal line. I stared at the frozen image, unable to move or think clearly. The seconds ticked by, stretching into an eternity, but the stream remained a still, silent picture. The technical difficulties couldn't have happened at a more revealing moment. It was as if the universe itself, in a twisted act of divine intervention, wanted me to have time to fully absorb every agonizing detail of the betrayal playing out before me. With shaking hands, my fingers stiff with shock, I reached for my laptop and began taking screenshots of the frozen frame. I zoomed in on David's face, on the sapphire necklace, on my father's disturbingly smug expression. Each click was a hammer blow to my heart. I tried refreshing the page, but a message appeared. Connection lost. Please stand by. The stream never came back online. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling, and called David, straight to voicemail. I texted him, "I can see you at the wedding. What the hell is going on?" The message showed as delivered but not read. I tried my father next. Again, voicemail. I left a message that consisted mostly of incoherent questions and barely contained sobs, the words blurring into a raw, desperate plea for answers. Finally, I texted Chloe, "Congratulations on your wedding. Interesting to see David there when he told me he was in San Francisco." 3 dots immediately appeared, showing she was typing a response. Then they disappeared. No message came. I sat in my apartment, still dressed up, the navy cocktail dress stained with champagne, with nowhere to go. I was surrounded by the pathetic trappings of my solo wedding viewing party, a cruel joke. And then I let the tears come. I cried until my carefully applied makeup ran in black streaks down my face. I cried until the champagne in my glass went flat, lifeless. I cried until my neighbors, concerned by the muffled sounds of my anguish, knocked on the wall to check if I was okay. When the tears finally subsided, replaced by a strange, hollow emptiness, something else began to take their place. Cold, calculating, anger. I looked again at the screenshots I'd taken. There was a story here, an elaborate narrative of deceit that needed to be uncovered. Why was David at my half-sister's wedding? Why was Victoria wearing my grandmother's necklace? Why had so many people lied to me, weaving such a complex web of fabrication? The apologetic email from the streaming company arrived later that evening, citing technical difficulties beyond our control. But it didn't matter. I'd seen enough. I spent the rest of that evening in a strange, almost unsettling calm, methodically making notes about everything I had observed, every question that now screamed for an answer. As night fell, I opened my laptop again, but not to check for updates on the wedding. Instead, I began what would become a week-long, relentless investigation into the tangled web of lies surrounding me. If you've ever had that gut punch moment where everything you thought was true suddenly shatters into a million pieces, you know exactly how I felt. The betrayal, when it comes from those closest to you, cuts deeper than any other. Looking back now, I realize that Frozen Wedding livestream was actually a gift. A brutal but necessary intervention, forcing me to see what had been happening right in front of me all along. It was time to uncover the full extent of their deception. The day after the wedding, I woke up with a strange, unsettling sense of clarity, despite having barely slept. The initial shock and raw grief had slowly hardened into a cold, unwavering determination to uncover the absolute truth. I called in sick to my freelance projects, made a large pot of black coffee, strong enough to power a small city, and began to transform my living room. It stopped being a place of comfort and became instead my personal investigation headquarters. I started with social media, while the wedding party was undoubtedly celebrating at lavish brunches and gift openings. Guests, inevitably, would be posting photos. I wasn't friends with many of my father's social circle, another subtle exclusion I now recognized. but their privacy settings were often, conveniently for me, lacking. Through public tags, location markers, and careful cross-referencing, I began piecing together more of the wedding than the live stream had ever shown me. There was David, casually in the background of a group shot at the rehearsal dinner, his arm draped casually over the back of my cousin's chair, a gesture of comfortable familiarity. There he was again, laughing, raising a glass during a toast in a selfie taken by one of the bridesmaids. Each image was a fresh stab of betrayal, a cold shard of ice piercing my heart. But I meticulously saved them all as evidence, creating a folder on my desktop labeled The Truth. The most revealing find was a candid photo posted by my father's golf buddy. It was a relaxed shot of my father, Michael, David, and Ethan's father, Robert Davis, standing together near the outdoor bar, deep in animated conversation. The caption read, simply, "The Three Musketeers planning the next venture, #family business, #wedding weekend." Family business. What family business involved David? The question echoed in my mind, a cold chill. I moved on to email. David and I shared a cloud storage account for practical purposes, sharing documents, photos, joint expenses. He hadn't been careful, or perhaps hadn't even thought to be, about what synced there. I found a trove of emails going back 8 months, exchanges between him and my father. The subject lines were innocuous: meeting prep, investment review. The content itself was often frustratingly vague. Most details apparently conveyed during phone calls I wasn't privy to. But the pattern was undeniable. They had been in regular, clandestine contact, entirely without my knowledge. The most damning evidence, however, came from David's calendar, which also synced to our shared cloud. For months, entries labeled investor meeting or client dinner corresponded exactly with the texts he'd sent me about working late, about being tied up with crucial business. But in his private notes section, the true nature of these meetings was chillingly revealed. Dinner with Michael and Victoria, or golf with Michael and Robert Davis. It was all there, laid bare. As morning bled into afternoon and afternoon into evening, I kept digging, driven by an almost manic energy. I created a timeline on my bedroom wall, a makeshift detective's board, using sticky notes and lengths of string connecting them, like something out of a crime show. Yellow sticky notes for the lies David had told me, blue for the family events I'd been systematically excluded from, red for the financial transactions I was only just beginning to uncover. Through my father's company website, I found recent press releases announcing a new strategic partnership with Reeves Tech Solutions, David's startup, to develop cutting-edge property management software. The timing coincided precisely with when he'd first, mysteriously, met my father, right after we got engaged. Had their entire relationship been a calculated business arrangement from the very beginning? The thought made me physically ill, a wave of nausea washing over me. Around midnight, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I answered anyway, a flicker of desperate hope that it might be David, finally calling with some impossible rational explanation. "Sarah, it's Mr. Peterson." It took me a moment, my mind still racing, to place the name. Mr. Peterson had been my grandmother Eleanor's attorney before she passed away 5 years ago. I'd met him only once, briefly, at the reading of her will. "I hope I'm not calling too late," he continued, his voice hesitant when I didn't immediately respond. "I saw your sister's wedding announcement in the Seattle Times, and it reminded me of something I've been troubled by for years." "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, fully alert now, every nerve ending tingling with a premonition. "Your grandmother's will," he began, his voice dropping to a somber tone. "The one we executed, the final version. It wasn't the one she had me prepare originally. She made significant changes in the final weeks of her life, when she was frankly heavily medicated. I had serious concerns about her capacity at that time, her mental state, but your father insisted she was lucid, fully aware." My grandmother, I remembered vividly, had left everything to my father in that final will, with only specific minor items designated for Victoria and eventually Chloe. I had received only a small cash bequest, a paltry sum, and none of the precious family heirlooms or properties that had been promised to me throughout my childhood. The beautiful antique writing desk, the vintage silver tea set, and of course, the sapphire jewelry set. "What was in the original will?" I asked, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. She left her house in rural Oregon to you specifically, Mr. Peterson stated, his words measured, deliberate. And the sapphire jewelry set that had come down through the maternal line, passed from your great-grandmother. She was quite clear, Sarah, that those items were to go directly to you, not through your father. The sapphire pendant, the one that had been gleaming so defiantly around Victoria's neck at the wedding. The house in Oregon, a charming, rustic place that my father had sold almost immediately after my grandmother's death, claiming it had been too much of a burden to maintain. The pieces, horrifyingly, were clicking into place. "Can you send me documentation of the original will?" I asked, my voice trembling now. "That's why I'm calling," he replied, a hint of something like relief in his tone. I kept copies, against my better judgment at the time. I always felt something wasn't right, a deep unease. The next morning, the documents arrived by courier, a thick envelope sealed with the legal firm's stamp. The contrast between the two wills was stark, undeniable. In the original, I was a primary beneficiary, alongside my father. In the revised version, I was almost entirely written out, a mere footnote. Armed with this devastating new information, I contacted Miss Miller, a lawyer specializing in estate fraud, recommended by a former colleague. Then I reached out to Laura Chen, a financial journalist who had once interviewed me for an article about freelance designers. She, in turn, put me in touch with a colleague who covered real estate development and had, coincidentally, been looking into my father's business practices for some time. The network was beginning to form. For days after the wedding, David's silence had been deafening. Finally, he called. I let it go straight to voicemail. His message was a masterpiece of deception, a carefully constructed facade of concern. "Sarah, I'm so sorry I haven't been in touch. The San Francisco meetings ran long, and then my phone died. I'm flying home tomorrow, can't wait to see you and tell you all about it. Love you." I texted back just 4 words. "I saw you there. Screenshots?" His response came minutes later, immediate and frantic. "We need to talk. It's not what you think." But it was exactly what I thought, and worse. As my investigation continued, meticulously piecing together fragments of information, I uncovered a complex, dizzying web of financial entanglements between David's startup and my father's company. What had initially appeared to be a standard arm's-length investment was, in fact, something far more sinister, closer to a calculated bribe or payoff. I found a wire transfer of $50,000 from my father to David's account shortly after we began dating. Another $75,000 when we got engaged. The startup, I soon realized with a sickening clarity, was essentially a shell company existing primarily on paper, sustained almost entirely by my father's funds, propped up by his capital. The most devastating discovery came a week after the wedding, when I met with Isabel, my father's former assistant, who had been abruptly let go the previous year. Over coffee in a quiet, secluded corner of a cafe, away from prying eyes, she confirmed my worst suspicions. Her eyes, filled with a deep sadness, couldn't quite meet mine. "Your father hired David to date you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It started as a way to keep tabs on you after your mother died. Michael was worried you might contest your grandmother's will. So our entire relationship? It was a lie?" My voice sounded hollow, distant, even to my own ears. "At first, yes," Isabel conceded, her gaze still fixed on her coffee cup. "But David talked about you all the time at the office. I honestly think he genuinely fell for you eventually." She reached across the table, her hand resting gently on mine, a gesture of unexpected empathy. "That's why I got fired, Sarah. You know, I told your father it was wrong, to keep manipulating you, that you deserved to know the truth." That night, my fingers trembled as I sent David a carefully worded text, each word chosen with cold precision. "I know everything. About the money, about why you started dating me. If you want any chance of explaining your side, come home tomorrow. Otherwise, don't bother coming back at all." His response was immediate, almost desperate. "I'll be there. There's more to this than you know." As I waited for the confrontation that would determine the entire course of my future, I gathered every piece of evidence I had painstakingly collected: emails, bank records, calendar entries, the 2 starkly different versions of my grandmother's will, the damning wedding photos showing David seamlessly integrated with my father's family. I arranged them all, neatly, meticulously, in a folder labeled simply, "The Truth." Then I waited for the man I had loved, the man who had been paid to love me in return, to come home and finally face what he had done. Have you ever felt that gut punch moment when you realize someone incredibly close to you, someone you trusted implicitly, has been living an elaborate double life? The pieces were all falling into place for me, forming a horrifying, coherent picture. But I still had to confront David face to face. Before I tell you about that explosive conversation, hit the like button if you've ever had your trust shattered by someone you thought you knew. And stay with me, because what I discovered next changed everything about how I would finally get justice. David returned on a Wednesday afternoon, 6 days after the wedding. I heard his key in the lock, a soft, final click, and I steeled myself for the confrontation I had been rehearsing, meticulously, in my mind for days. He entered cautiously, pushing his suitcase just inside the door, as if unsure whether he would even be staying. He looked utterly exhausted, his usually perfectly styled hair disheveled, his expression wary, almost defeated. "Sarah," he began, taking a hesitant step toward me. I held up my hand, a silent, firm command to stop him. "Don't come any closer." We stood in silence for a long moment, the air thick with unspoken words, 3 years of what I had believed was love hanging precariously in the balance between us. "I can explain," he finally said, his voice quiet, pleading. "Please do." My voice was steadier than I expected, a calm that surprised even me. "Explain why you were at Chloe's wedding when you told me you were in San Francisco. Explain why you've been meeting with my father behind my back for months. Explain the $50,000 he transferred to your account 3 years ago, right around the time we mysteriously met through mutual friends." His face paled, the color draining from it. "You've been investigating me." It wasn't a question. "Wouldn't you?" I shot back, my voice gaining strength. "If you saw your fiancé at a wedding he claimed he couldn't attend, sitting comfortably with a family that systematically excluded you." David sank onto the couch, his shoulders slumping, running his hands over his face, as if trying to erase the last few years. "It started as a business arrangement," he admitted, his voice muffled. "Your father approached me through a contact at my previous job. He said he needed someone to keep an eye on you after your mother died. Michael was worried about potential legal challenges to your grandmother's estate. So you were hired to date me." The words tasted bitter in my mouth, like ash. "Initially, yes." He looked up at me then, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. "But Sarah, I fell in love with you. For real. After the first few months, it wasn't an act anymore. Every day, every moment with you felt genuine." "Is that why you kept meeting with my father? Why you kept lying about where you were going?" I pressed, my voice rising slightly. "Because it wasn't an act. You just got trapped." He nodded miserably. "I got trapped in the situation. I tried to back out of the arrangement once I realized my feelings for you were genuine, but your father threatened to pull funding from my startup. Everything I've built would have collapsed." "Your startup, the one that's actually just a shell company, funded entirely by my father?" I raised an eyebrow, a cold, challenging gesture. "The one that doesn't actually have any real clients or products?" David flinched, the accusation hitting its mark. "We're developing real software. The funding arrangement is complicated, but the business is legitimate." His defense sounded weak, even to him. "Is that why you needed to be at Chloe's wedding?" I continued, relentless. "For business?" "Your father insisted," he said, his voice flat. "He said it would look suspicious if his future son-in-law wasn't there, but not suspicious that his actual daughter wasn't invited." I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that echoed in the quiet apartment. "And what about our engagement? Was that part of the business arrangement too?" "No." David stood up abruptly, taking a step toward me, his face etched with earnestness. "I proposed because I love you, Sarah. Your father was actually against it. He thought it would complicate things." "Complicate what things exactly?" Before David could answer, my phone rang, startling us both. My father's name, Michael, flashed on the screen. I showed it to David, whose expression shifted from pleading to one of resigned defeat. "He's probably calling to do damage control," David said, his shoulders slumping. "He knows I'm here." I put the phone on speaker. "Hello, Dad." "Sarah," my father's voice was tight, strained with suppressed anger. "I understand David is with you." "Yes, we're having a fascinating conversation about how you hired my fiancé to spy on me." I replied, my voice dangerously calm. Would you like to join us and add your perspective? There was a long, stunned pause on the other end. Then, this isn't a topic for a phone call. We should meet in person. Actually, I think speakerphone is perfect for this conversation, I countered smoothly. David was just about to explain what our engagement was complicating in your master plan. David, my father's voice hardened, a menacing undertone. Remember our agreement. What agreement is that, Dad? I pressed, leaning into the speaker. The one where he pretends to love me, or the one where he helps you steal my inheritance? That's enough, Sarah. My father's tone shifted back to the condescending, dismissive one I knew all too well. You're being dramatic, as usual. If you'd just let me explain. I'm all ears, Dad. Please explain why Victoria was wearing Grandma's sapphire pendant at the wedding. The one that Grandma always said would be mine. Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear my father calculating his next move, weighing his options. Your grandmother changed her mind about certain bequests before she died, he said carefully, his voice regaining some composure. It's all perfectly legal, except that I have a copy of her original will, I countered. My voice unwavering, the one she made when she was fully competent, before you started messing with her medication schedule during those last weeks. Who gave you that? My father's voice rose sharply, a crack in his controlled facade. Those documents are confidential. Apparently your conscience isn't the only one that's been bothering people all these years, I retorted, a flicker of grim satisfaction. The three-way conversation continued to deteriorate from there, spiraling into chaos. My father alternated between thinly veiled threats and clumsy attempts at emotional manipulation. David sat in miserable silence on the couch, occasionally trying to interject with mumbled defenses that satisfied neither me nor my father. At one point, Victoria joined the call, her shrill voice adding another grating layer to the cacophony. Sarah, you need to stop this vindictive behavior, she snapped. Your father has only ever wanted what's best for the family. Which family is that, Victoria? I shot back, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Because it's never included me. That's not true, my father interjected, trying to regain control. We've always included you as much as circumstances allowed. Circumstances like hiring my boyfriend to spy on me, I pressed, each word a precise jab. Like changing Grandma's will when she was too drugged to know what she was signing? Like wearing her jewelry to a wedding I wasn't allowed to attend in person? The pendant is a family heirloom, Victoria said defensively, her voice tight with indignation. I am family. It was supposed to pass through the maternal line, I countered, my gaze fixed on David, who couldn't meet my eyes. You're not my mother. Thank God for that, Victoria muttered, not quite under her breath, a venomous whisper. As the argument escalated, spiraling further out of control, I calmly, secretly, pressed record on my second phone, which I had placed discreetly on the coffee table. Washington, where I lived, was a one-party consent state for recordings. Every damning admission, every thinly veiled threat, every glaring contradiction, every desperate justification. It was all being preserved for future use, a meticulous record of their unraveling. The breaking point came when my father, clearly frustrated by his inability to control the narrative, made an unexpected offer. Look, Sarah, he began. His voice surprisingly calm now, a new tactic. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement. There's no need for all this hostility. What if we set up a trust for you, say $200,000? Would that satisfy your concerns about your grandmother's estate? Are you trying to buy my silence, Dad? I asked, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. I'm trying to be fair. Family disputes like this can get messy and public. None of us want that, especially with a company going through an expansion phase. What company? I challenged him. Your real estate business or David's fake startup? Reeves Tech is a legitimate subsidiary of Miller Development now, my father said stiffly, his voice regaining its corporate edge. The acquisition was finalized last month. I looked at David, who still couldn't meet my eyes, his face a mask of shame. So you sold your company to my father, the one you said was going to make us rich, the one that justified all those late nights and business trips? It was a good deal, David said weakly, his voice barely audible. I thought eventually we'd tell you together, once everything was settled. Once I was thoroughly trapped in this web of lies, I retorted, my voice cutting through the tension. You mean once I had married you, and it was too late to back out without a messy, expensive divorce? No one is trapped, my father interjected, his voice sharp. Think of it as a merger of families and businesses. David brings technical expertise we need for modernizing our property management systems. You could join the company too, Sarah. We could use someone with your design skills for marketing materials. The casual, almost dismissive way he suggested incorporating me into their scheme, after years of systematic exclusion and deliberate manipulation, was the final straw. It was an insult. I don't want your money, I said, my voice cold, resolute. I don't want a job at your company. What I want is everything that should have been mine from the beginning. Grandma's house, her jewelry, my fair share of her estate, and a public acknowledgement of what you've done. That's not going to happen, my father said, all pretense of reconciliation gone from his voice, replaced by cold, hard anger. Be reasonable, Sarah. Take the trust fund. Move on with your life. Without David, you mean? I challenged, pushing him, now that he's served his purpose? David's relationship with you was never part of our official business arrangement, my father said carefully, a lawyer's precision in his words. Whatever personal relationship developed between you two is your own affair. How generous of you, I replied sarcastically, the bitter taste of truth on my tongue. The call ended shortly after, abruptly cut off by my father making vague threats about legal consequences if I pursued my baseless accusations, and Victoria adding a final venomous barb about how I'd always been difficult, just like your mother. When the line went dead, the silence in the apartment was heavy, suffocating. David and I sat there, separated by the coffee table, the rain that had begun to fall drumming a quiet, relentless rhythm against the windows of the apartment we had shared. The home I had believed was built on love. What happens now? David finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. I stood up, my movements deliberate, and walked to the bedroom, returning with a small velvet-covered box. I placed it on the coffee table between us. Inside was the engagement ring he had given me, nestled in its original cushion, sparkling under the dim light. Now you leave, I said simply, the words a quiet declaration of finality. Whatever real feelings developed between us, they grew from a foundation of lies. I can never trust you again. Sarah, please. His voice broke, ragged with despair. I know I've made terrible mistakes, but what we have is real. What we have, I countered, my voice firm, is a business transaction that got complicated. That's what my father said, right? That I was complicating things by actually falling in love with you? David couldn't deny it. He took the ring box with trembling hands, his face a landscape of defeat. Where will you go? I asked, surprising myself with the question. Some small, lingering part of me, a vestige of my former self, still cared about his welfare, despite everything. Your father has a corporate apartment I can use until I find a place, he admitted, his voice hollow. Part of the acquisition deal. Of course, even in this final, crushing moment, my father had ensured David would land safely, cushioned by his wealth, while I was left to pick up the pieces, alone. After David packed a small suitcase with a few essentials and walked out the door, the click of the lock echoing in the now silent apartment, I sat down. The rain still fell outside, a monotonous drumming against the windows. I allowed myself one final evening of unadulterated grief for the relationship I had thought was real. I cried for the love I had given so freely, so completely. I cried for the future I had planned, meticulously, joyfully, with a man who had been paid to be with me. Then, as midnight approached, a new resolve settled within me. I dried my tears, my face streaked but determined, and opened my laptop. My father thought this ended with David's exit and a generous trust fund designed to buy my silence. He had no idea that the confrontation was just the beginning of my methodical response to their profound betrayal. I had recorded everything. I had documentation. I had witnessed testimony from people like Isabel and Mr. Peterson. And most importantly, I had nothing left to lose. The next morning, I began implementing the plan that would finally bring justice, not just for myself, but for my grandmother and my mother as well. A plan that would shake my father's carefully constructed world to its very foundations. The morning after David moved out, I woke with a sense of clear purpose I hadn't felt in years. The initial shock and consuming grief had hardened into a steely, unyielding determination. If my father, Michael, thought I would quietly accept a payoff and disappear, he didn't know me at all. Then again, he had never truly bothered to know me. My first call was to Ms. Albright, a forensic accountant recommended by my attorney. I immediately forwarded her all the financial documents I had painstakingly gathered, the suspicious transfers between my father and David, the acquisition paperwork for David's startup, and the unsettling activity surrounding my grandmother's estate. "There's definitely something worth investigating here," Ms. Albright said, after reviewing the materials, her voice calm and professional. "These property transfers around the time of your grandmother's death raised several red flags for potential tax evasion." Tax evasion? I hadn't even considered that angle. "Your father moved several properties into shell companies right before and after her death," Ms. Albright explained. "It looks like he may have been trying to avoid estate taxes by making it appear the properties were sold at below market values to related business entities." This was exactly the kind of leverage I needed. My father feared public scandal above all else. His carefully cultivated reputation in the business community was everything to him. My next step was to reach out to my mother's sister, Aunt Carol, who had become estranged from our family after my parents' divorce. We hadn't spoken in years, partly because my father had told me she wanted nothing to do with me, a claim I now questioned, along with every other truth he had ever fed me. "Sarah," she answered the phone, her voice tinged with surprise, then a flicker of hope. "I never thought I'd hear from you again." "I'm sorry it's been so long," I said, suddenly emotional at hearing her voice, a familiar warmth I hadn't realized I missed. "I think I've been misled about a lot of things." Our conversation lasted hours, stretching into the afternoon as we painstakingly pieced together our separate, fractured experiences with my father. She confirmed what I had begun to suspect. My father had systematically isolated me from my mother's side of the family through a deliberate campaign of misinformation and manipulation. "After your mom died, I tried to reach out so many times," Sarah, Aunt Carol recounted, her voice thick with sorrow. "But your father's lawyer sent cease and desist letters, claiming I was harassing you. Eventually, I gave up. He told me," her voice broke, "he told me you blamed me for Mom's stress during her illness, that you thought her cancer might have gone into remission if she hadn't been worrying about me so much." "Oh, Sarah," Aunt Carol's voice cracked, "that's monstrous. I would never say such a thing. Your mother adored you. Her greatest worry at the end was that your father would cut you out completely once she was gone." By the end of our call, I had not only reconnected with my aunt, but also discovered I had cousins, great-aunts, and family friends on my mother's side who had been trying to maintain contact with me for years. My father had intercepted cards, returned gifts, and spread malicious rumors about my supposed disinterest in maintaining these relationships. The betrayal ran even deeper than I imagined. Over the next 2 weeks, I methodically built my case against my father, while simultaneously, powerfully, reconnecting with my mother's family. I learned that my situation wasn't unique. My father had a long, insidious history of manipulative business practices that had hurt many people over the years. Ethan's father, Robert Davis, for instance, had once been my father's business partner, until a suspicious contract clause had forced him out of their joint venture at a significant loss. Years later, desperate for financial stability, Robert had arranged his son's marriage to Chloe as a way back into my father's good graces. The entire wedding, I realized, with a chilling clarity, had been more business merger than romantic celebration. I reached out to former employees of my father's company who had been fired under questionable circumstances. Many were eager to share their experiences once they knew someone was finally, bravely challenging Michael Thompson. Isabel, my father's former assistant, introduced me to James Lee, the company's former CFO, who had left abruptly 3 years earlier. Over coffee in a quiet corner of a local cafe, James provided the crucial missing pieces I needed. "Your father has been using a network of shell companies to hide assets for years, Sarah," James explained, pointing to a complex diagram he had drawn. "Not just to evade taxes, but to conceal property from business partners during negotiations and from your mother during their divorce." "Do you have documentation?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, my heart pounding with anticipation. James smiled grimly. "I kept copies of everything before I left. I always knew someday someone would need this information." Armed with James's meticulously detailed documents and Ms. Albright's incisive forensic analysis, I met with my attorney, Ms. Chen, to discuss next steps. We have enough here for potential civil and criminal cases, Ms. Chen said, reviewing the overwhelming stack of files. The question is, what do you want to achieve? I thought carefully before answering, weighing every word. I want what's rightfully mine from my grandmother's estate. I want my father held accountable for his actions. And I want the truth to be public, so he can't do this to anyone else. We can file a petition to invalidate the amended will based on your grandmother's lack of capacity, Ms. Chen explained. With Mr. Peterson's testimony and the medical records showing the significant increase in her medication, we have a strong case, but your father will fight this aggressively. I'm ready, I assured her, my voice unwavering. What about the financial improprieties? That's where we have real leverage, Ms. Chen acknowledged, her eyes glinting with professional satisfaction. Based on what James provided, there are potential securities violations, tax evasion, and fraud charges that could definitely interest federal authorities. However, she cautioned, her voice serious, once we go down that road, we can't control the outcome. Your father could face serious consequences, including criminal charges. I understand, I said quietly, the weight of my decision settling over me, but he's had years to make this right, and he chose deception at every turn. Over the next month, my team and I built our case methodically, meticulously. We documented every suspicious transaction, every blatant lie, every manipulative gesture. I created a secure website containing all the assembled evidence, accessible only with a password, ready to be shared with authorities or the media if necessary. I also began making strategic connections with my father's business competitors and former partners who had been similarly deceived. Robert Davis, despite his daughter's recent marriage to Chloe, was particularly helpful in understanding the intricate structure of my father's current business dealings. Michael has overextended himself on the Westlake development, Robert confided during a discreet meeting, his voice low. He's leveraged everything on that project succeeding. Any significant disruption now would be catastrophic for him. This crucial information shaped the timing of my approach. I would wait until the Westlake investors meeting, scheduled for next month, to make my first decisive move. Throughout this intense period, I received increasingly desperate messages from both David and my father. David claimed he was falling apart without me, that he had made a terrible mistake, that he wanted to make amends, to somehow repair the irreparable. My father alternated between thinly veiled threats and increasingly generous financial offers to settle this family matter privately. I responded to none of them. My silence was its own weapon. As the investors' meeting approached, I carefully prepared my opening gambit. I wouldn't reveal everything at once, but just enough to demonstrate the absolute seriousness of my position. My lawyer drafted a formal letter outlining the will contest and the compelling evidence of financial improprieties, with a clear, unambiguous message. We were prepared to take this information to the authorities and the media unless specific conditions were met. Those conditions included 1. The immediate return of all items specified in my grandmother's original will, including the Oregon house that had been sold, or its current market value, and all family jewelry. 2. A full financial accounting of my grandmother's estate, transparent and verified. 3. A public acknowledgement of the deception regarding her will. 4. The immediate resignation of my father from any fiduciary positions in family trusts or estates. The letter was delivered by courier to my father's corporate office. The morning of the investors' meeting, an identical copy was sent to the family home, addressed specifically to Victoria. A third copy went to my father's personal attorney. Within hours, my phone exploded with calls and texts, a frantic barrage of notifications. I let them all go to voicemail as I sat calmly in a cafe across the street from the high-rise building where the investors' meeting was taking place. Through the large plate glass windows, I could clearly see my father arriving in his executive car, his face tight with suppressed rage as he checked his phone repeatedly, his thumb frantically swiping. My plan was working perfectly. He would be completely off balance during the meeting, distracted and unnerved by my demands, and the imminent threat of public exposure. The shrewd investors would undoubtedly notice his uncharacteristic anxiety, raising uncomfortable questions about his stability and the project's viability. Meanwhile, James Lee, the former CFO, was meeting with two key investors separately, ostensibly about an unrelated business opportunity. During that meeting, he would casually, subtly, mention his concerns about the Westlake project's financing structure, planting insidious seeds of doubt that would grow, inevitably, when combined with my father's unusually erratic behavior. As I watched my father enter the building, my phone lit up with a text from Chloe. "What have you done? Dad is freaking out." I replied simply, "Ask him about Grandma's will. Ask him about why he hired David to date me. Ask him where the money for your wedding really came from." There was a long pause before her response. "Is that true? About David?" "Every word. Ask him yourself." Another long pause. Then, "I didn't know. I swear." Whether I believed her or not was irrelevant at that moment. The cracks were beginning to form, slowly but surely, in my father's carefully constructed world. Family members questioning him, business partners growing suspicious, the terrifying threat of public exposure looming over everything he had painstakingly built. And this, I knew, was just the beginning. 3 days after the investors' meeting, which I later learned had ended with several key backers requesting additional due diligence before committing more funds, my father finally requested a face-to-face meeting. "Just you and me," he specified in a terse email. "No lawyers, no recordings, we need to talk like family." I agreed, but with conditions of my own. We would meet in a public place of my choosing. I would have someone I trusted nearby, discreetly, and he would come alone. No Victoria, no business associates. We set the meeting for the following day at a busy restaurant in the city. As I prepared for this final, decisive confrontation, I felt a strange, profound calm. After years of being manipulated, lied to, and systematically erased, I was finally, irrevocably, taking control of my own story. The justice I had planned was not just about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. It was about exposing the truth, about seeking justice for my mother and grandmother, about ensuring that my father could never again use his wealth and influence to hurt the people who should have been able to trust him most. As I closed my laptop that night, I looked at the collection of old family photos I had gathered during my investigation. Images of my mother holding me as a baby, my grandmother teaching me to bake cookies. Moments of genuine, uncomplicated love that my father had tried so desperately to erase and replace with his manufactured version of family. Tomorrow I would face him with the truth, and nothing, not a single thing, would ever be the same again. The meeting with my father took place at the Harbor View Cafe, a busy, bustling restaurant overlooking the Puget Sound. I arrived early, securing a corner table with a good, clear view of the entrance. My Aunt Carol sat at the bar, pretending to be a stranger, but close enough to intervene if necessary, a silent guardian angel. When my father, Michael, walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. In the months since I had begun my campaign, he had aged visibly, lines etched deeper into his face, a weariness in his eyes I'd never seen before. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by the cautious, almost hesitant movements of a man under siege. "Sarah," he said, taking the seat directly across from me. No hug, no kiss on the cheek, just my name spoken like a question, an accusation. "Dad," I replied evenly, my voice calm, controlled. "Thank you for coming." He glanced around nervously, his eyes darting across the busy restaurant, before speaking, his voice low, urgent. "This has gone far enough. You've made your point." "Have I?" I asked, leaning back slightly, my gaze steady. "What point do you think I'm making? That you feel excluded? Overlooked? I understand you're upset about the wedding, about David, but bringing the IRS and my investors into a family disagreement is taking things too far." I took a slow sip of water, letting his words hang in the air between us, heavy with his attempt to redefine the narrative. "This isn't about feeling excluded, Dad," I stated, my voice clear and firm. "This is about you systematically lying to me, manipulating me, and stealing what was rightfully mine." "I never stole from you," he protested, his voice rising slightly, but his eyes flickered away, unable to meet mine. It was a tell. Grandma's will, the Oregon house, the sapphire jewelry, the trust fund she established that somehow disappeared after her death. I listed them, each item a cold, undeniable fact. "There were expenses," he stammered, scrambling. "End-of-life care." "Stop lying," I cut him off, my voice sharp. "I have the hospital bills. I have the original will. I have statements from her attorney and doctor. All of it." My father's face hardened, the last vestiges of pleasantry falling away. "What exactly do you want, Sarah? Money? Is that it? Name your price. And let's end this before it destroys everything." I sent you my conditions in the letter, I reminded him, my voice flat. Did you read it? Those terms are impossible. The Oregon house was sold years ago. Some of the jewelry has been promised to Chloe, and a public acknowledgement would damage the family name needlessly. The family name? I couldn't help but laugh, a bitter, mirthless sound. You mean your reputation? Your business standing? That's what this has always been about, hasn't it? Appearances. The perfect family image, even if it meant erasing me when I didn't fit the picture. For the first time, something like genuine shame, a flicker of remorse, crossed my father's face. His gaze dropped to the table. I never intended to erase you. Things just evolved after I married Victoria. She had certain expectations about our life together, and you were inconvenient to those expectations. He didn't answer directly, but the admission hung in the air. You tried to provide for me financially, I acknowledged, a cold, hard truth. Your mother's settlement, your college tuition, the bare minimum required by the divorce agreement, nothing more, I corrected him sharply. And then you hired my boyfriend to spy on me, to make sure I wouldn't cause problems about Grandma's will. My father looked genuinely startled, caught off guard. Who told you that? David, Isabel, does it matter? It's true, isn't it? After a long, agonizing pause, he nodded, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't supposed to become serious between you two, just a way to keep informed about your activities after your mother died. You were so angry, making accusations about the will. We were concerned you might take legal action. Because you knew the will was fraudulent, I finished for him. Not fraudulent. Your grandmother changed her mind at the end. While heavily medicated and being isolated from everyone except you and Victoria, he protested, his voice laced with indignation. We went back and forth like this for nearly an hour, a tense, draining dance. My father alternated between defensive justifications, strained attempts at explanation, and occasional, fleeting glimpses of genuine regret. Throughout, I maintained a calm, almost detached exterior that seemed to unnerve him more than any anger or outburst would have. Finally, when it became clear we were at an impasse, that his old tactics wouldn't work, I placed a small USB drive on the table between us. It was a simple black rectangle, unassuming, yet it held the power to dismantle his entire life. What's this? He asked, his voice tight with suspicion. Everything, I replied simply, my gaze steady. Financial records, witness statements, recordings, communications between you and David. The original and fraudulent wills side by side, evidence of tax evasion going back 15 years, everything I've discovered in the past month. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the drive, his fingers hovering over it. This is a copy, I continued, my voice clear and precise. The originals are secured with multiple people, set to be released to authorities and the media if anything happens to me, or if you fail to meet my terms. You're blackmailing me, he said, his voice hollow, defeated. I'm negotiating from a position of strength, I corrected him, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. Something you taught me, Dad, though not intentionally. I stood to leave. You have 48 hours to agree to my terms, or I move forward with both legal action and public disclosure. My father caught my wrist, his grip surprisingly firm. Sarah, wait. You're my daughter. Despite everything, doesn't that mean something to you? Looking into his eyes, I saw not the powerful, intimidating figure who had shaped my childhood, but an aging man, terrified of losing everything he had meticulously built. It did mean something, I said quietly, the truth aching in my chest. That's why this hurt so much. 48 hours, Dad. The choice is yours. Exactly 47 hours later, my father's attorney contacted mine with a counteroffer. They would return all jewelry mentioned in the original will. They would pay the current market value of the Oregon house, plus interest. They would create a new trust in my name with the amount specified in the original will, plus 20 years of growth. And they would provide a full, certified accounting of my grandmother's estate. The only modification to my demands was the public acknowledgement. Instead of a formal public statement, my father offered a private family gathering where he would admit his wrongdoing to all extended family members from both sides. After consulting with my legal team, I accepted these terms, with one crucial addition. David would be required to return all funds received from my father and dissolve any business relationship between them. The papers were signed 3 days later. Within a week, I received the first installment of restitution and a beautifully carved wooden box containing my grandmother's jewelry, including the sapphire pendant that had gleamed so defiantly around Victoria's neck at the wedding. The family gathering took place the following month at a neutral location, a private room in an upscale hotel. Relatives from both my mother's and father's sides attended, many meeting for the first time in decades, a testament to my father's deliberate isolation tactics. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a fragile silence, until my father stood and began to speak. "I've asked you all here today because I owe my daughter Sarah an apology," he began, his voice uncharacteristically subdued, lacking its usual commanding tone. "Over the years, I have made decisions that prioritized my new family and my business interests over her well-being. I altered my mother's will against her wishes. I deliberately isolated Sarah from many of you through deception, and I interfered in her personal life in ways that were inappropriate and harmful." Watching him admit these things publicly in front of witnesses was surreal. Some relatives gasped, others nodded, as if they had suspected as much all along, their unspoken suspicions finally validated. Victoria sat rigidly beside him, her face a mask of controlled anger, her jaw tight. "As part of making amends," my father continued, his voice steadying slightly, "I have restored Sarah's inheritance as it was originally intended. I am also reopening channels of communication between our extended families that I previously obstructed." The gathering slowly, tentatively, transformed into a long overdue family reunion. I connected with cousins I barely remembered, aunts and uncles who shared warm, vivid stories about my mother, distant relatives who had wondered for years what had happened to me, why I had seemingly disappeared. Photos were taken, contact information exchanged, tentative plans made for future gatherings. My father and Victoria left early, their part in the proceedings completed, their faces etched with a strange mix of relief and resentment. As they exited, I noticed Chloe lingering behind, seemingly torn between following her parents and staying. To my surprise, she approached me as the evening was winding down. "I didn't know," she said without preamble, her voice small, vulnerable. "About David, about the will, about any of it. I thought you just didn't want to be part of the family." At 17, she seemed suddenly younger than her years, a child caught in the messy, adult machinations of deceit. "I believe you," I said, and was surprised to realize I truly meant it. "You were raised in the environment they created. You didn't have a choice." "They're getting divorced," she blurted out, her voice barely a whisper. "Dad and Victoria. After everything that happened, they're splitting up. She's furious about the money he's giving back to you." This was news to me, but not entirely surprising. Their relationship had always been transactional, built on mutual benefit rather than genuine affection. "Are you okay?" I asked, feeling an unexpected surge of concern for this half-sister I barely knew, whose world was also being upended. She shrugged, a typical teenage gesture of nonchalance. "I'm going to college next year anyway, California. Dad's already transferred the tuition into a separate account, so it's protected from whatever happens next." Always the businessman, my father, even in the midst of personal collapse, securing assets. "If you ever need to talk," I offered, looking at her, "I'm here. We're still family, in our way." Chloe nodded awkwardly, then rejoined a group of cousins her age, leaving me with a sense of a tentative connection, neither rejected nor fully embraced, but a starting point nonetheless. In the months that followed, the promised restitution was meticulously completed. My father's business suffered significantly as rumors of financial improprieties spread throughout his industry, despite our private settlement, and several major projects, including Westlake, were put on indefinite hold. The divorce proceedings between him and Victoria became incredibly contentious, with allegations of infidelity on both sides making their way into local gossip circles, a public spectacle. David attempted to contact me several times, each message more desperate than the last. He had lost his company, his financial backing, and apparently, his self-respect. His final email acknowledged the profound harm he had caused and expressed what seemed like genuine remorse, but ended with yet another plea for reconciliation that I could not answer. As for me, I used a significant portion of my restored inheritance to establish a foundation focused on supporting elder care advocacy, and preventing the financial exploitation of vulnerable seniors. The foundation was named after my grandmother, Eleanor Thompson, a small but meaningful way of honoring what should have been her true legacy, her inherent kindness and generosity. I also connected with a growing network of people who had similar experiences with family financial abuse, creating resources and support systems I desperately wished had existed when I was going through it alone. This work became unexpectedly fulfilling, giving a profound purpose to the pain I had endured. Through this network, I met Mark, a financial investigator who had helped his own grandfather recover assets hidden by unscrupulous relatives. Our shared experiences and a deep mutual commitment to preventing similar abuses created an immediate connection that gradually, organically, developed into something more. Unlike with David, this relationship grew slowly, patiently, built on an unwavering foundation of honesty, transparency, and genuine mutual respect. 1 year after the fateful wedding livestream that had shattered my world, I received an unexpected package. Inside was a beautifully framed photograph of my mother and grandmother together, smiling, vibrant, in front of the rustic Oregon house that should have been my inheritance. A small handwritten note from my father accompanied it. Found this while cleaning out storage. Thought you should have it. The house and the memories were always meant to be yours. It wasn't exactly an apology, not in the traditional sense, but for my father, it was something remarkably close to one. I placed the photo carefully on my mantle, a powerful reminder of where I came from and what I had overcome. The frozen image from Chloe's wedding livestream, the one that had revealed so much betrayal in a single, devastating frame, remains saved on my computer. I rarely look at it now, but I keep it as a potent reminder that sometimes the most painful revelations can ultimately be a gift, forcing you to see what had been happening around you all along and giving you the undeniable evidence you needed to reclaim your rightful place in your own story. Family betrayal cuts deeper than any other kind. If my story resonated with you in any way, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family justice in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who wronged you? What gave you the strength to do it? Like and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about finding your voice after betrayal. And share this video with someone who might need to know they're not alone in their family struggles. Thank you for listening to my journey from exclusion to empowerment. Remember, sometimes the family we build for ourselves after betrayal becomes stronger and more true than the one we were born into.